Welcome to Inside Out, a yoga therapy podcast with me, Jane.
And me, Sophie. So welcome to this episode of Inside Out, a yoga therapy podcast. In this episode of Inside Out, we discuss the topics of sexual abuse and coercive control, amongst other things. As yoga therapists, we both want to make it absolutely clear that we do not recommend or condone engaging in any sexual acts whatsoever in any type of yoga class, group or one-to-one setting. If you have experienced sexual trauma or coercion, or are simply interested and curious in learning more about your sexuality, we strongly encourage seeking support from a qualified healthcare professional. Your GP can provide guidance and signpost you to a licensed sexual therapist for appropriate care. And so, if discussions around sexual abuse or coercive control are sensitive topics for you, please listen with care or consider skipping this episode. I'm Sophie, and today Jane and I wanted to explore an important and sensitive topic of what it means to be an ethical yoga teacher, to be a student moving in ethical yoga spaces. And with that, we're going to be talking about examples of the darker aspects of the yoga world. And as I said in the last episode, there's good and bad in every profession, and we wanted to frame the beginning of this conversation around the new investigative podcast from BBC Sounds and Radio 4, which is called The Bad Guru World of Secrets. For those of you who haven't heard of this, it's a podcast that uncovers disturbing allegations of sexual exploitation, grooming, and trafficking tied to a well-known yoga movement led by a man called Gregorian Bivalaru. Now, the podcast frames Bivalaru as a convicted sex offender, a spiritual leader behind the Atman Federation, which is a worldwide organisation with yoga centres across the world. One of these centres, as the podcast explains, is Tara Yoga in London, where a former student, Miranda, very courageously and bravely shares her experience. Miranda's story spans years of involvement with these organisations and reveals how what was presented to her as a peaceful path to spiritual growth quickly spiralled into a domino effect of coercion, manipulation and abuse. After joining tantric yoga classes at this Tara Yoga Centre, she found herself entangled in hypersexualized rituals, coerced into trafficking, and deceived into believing that these experiences were essential to her spiritual development. Her story, which is now being shared publicly, we know, don't we, that it's one of many that paints a gut-wrenching, bone-chilling picture of how yoga's promise of healing can, in tragic cases, be twisted into something extremely harmful and traumatising. Jane and I have spoken about this topic of conversation, and we both absolutely agree it's essential that we approach it with compassion and deep respect for those affected. And while yoga has been long celebrated for its mental, physical, emotional and spiritual benefits, this is an example of a chapter in its history in our present day that warrants discourse, reflection and ethical considerations. And so, in this episode, we want to have an open, respectful conversation about the ethics of yoga. What does it mean to practice ethically? How can we create safe, supportive spaces within our communities? And most importantly, how do we protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation, particularly in the name of yoga? We approach this topic with great sensitivity, honouring those who have shared their experiences, and with a commitment to ensuring the healing and transformative power of yoga remains a force of good in the world. a non-harming force of which true yoga is imbued with. So Jane, I mean, where do we begin?
There's so much, isn't there, in there? And having listened to the podcast again, because I just wanted to, refresh my memory, even though it's a very, very hard listen, I would say. It just made me, the overriding feeling was that, this particular individual and many others like her, it's like have kept going back because of the promise that something was going to change for them and there was going to be some point of transformation. And I find that heartbreaking because, it's all based on lies. And yoga, one of the primary tenets is truth. And what she has done is she's spoken truth there. And so good on her. But the whole web of it is just all deceit and not just people in power deceiving vulnerable people, but also people deceiving themselves. And it just make me think about that if we really understand what yoga is, and we're creating like a place, studio or an organization, the problem it always is that the tenets of yoga are not being observed. And in terms of the practices that are being given, they're not based upon anything that is going to bring about the potential transformation that these people are looking for, even if it's a small thing. And the other area is that, and there have been many, many people, mostly women, but some men as well, who have come out and spoken about various yoga gurus, not just yoga, but other sort of spiritual leaders and well-being gurus, if you like, and it's extremely brave to be that whistleblower, to be the first person to, put your head over the parapet and say, this is what happened to me. I realised what it is now, and I'm doing it to make sure that no one else has that experience again. And you and I have got personal experience of somewhat of knowing someone who was in that position, and watching someone struggle with that and the potential fallout from that as well is really hard. And I think for me, the first place that I probably would want to look is how do we take responsibility for our own selves, and what questions do we need to be asking? And one of the things that our teachers always say is question everything. If you're not sure about something, if something doesn't feel quite right, ask the questions. And again, that goes back to a feeling of disempowerment that's often rife in, for women. I mean, this woman, she's highly intelligent. She's a very, as she says herself, she comes from a very privileged and, supportive background. But even so, the level of manipulation that happens there, it's so subtle. It's not obvious at all. And I think that's the shocking thing, isn't it? Certainly for me, I'd have sniffed out the BS straight away, but that's just, I'm made differently. And I think you probably would as well. But you never know, do you? Until you're in that situation.
Firstly, it was such a hard listen. It was I had such a visceral experience listening to it.
Yeah.
There were times where I felt sick, and there were times where I was really emotional, nearly crying, because obviously when we listen to these stories, that level of empathy and compassion for the people that go through it is naturally going to step forwards, isn't it? And I think there's a couple of things with this idea of how do we distinguish between genuine spiritual guidance and exploitative behaviour. When you was just talking then, I was thinking about how Miranda explained that these organisations encouraged her to distance herself from her friends and family. And like you said, that's real subtle coercion, isn't it? And the thing with what we understand to be true yoga is that discourse is relevant, that sharing experiences with lots of different people to question and to critically appraise and say, is that something that feels right for me, is so vital in the path of your own spiritual guidance. And this idea that, that simple thing that just comes so freely in my head of yoga being a journey of the self, through the self, to the self. It's that thing of, well, how is it feeling for you? Is there a small voice that's saying, I don't feel comfortable here, there's something that doesn't feel quite right? But the issue with that is that we understand that, and we've experienced this ourselves, that we have a disconnect from that small voice. We can have a disconnect from how our bodies are physically feeling due to the life events and stresses that we've been through. So then when you're in a space where someone's saying, well, I'm telling you that this is how you should feel, I'm telling you that this is appropriate, I'm telling you that if you do this, you are then going to feel connected. It's that, I suppose, that desperate feeling that every human can go through to just feel that bit better in that context of then somebody who takes something that's an ancient, beautiful practice and then calls it yoga, when if you listen to that podcast, absolutely nothing about the word yoga in that podcast shouldn't even almost be in the same sentence, because it's absolutely not yoga. But it's how as a student, do you know that you're moving in an ethical space?
Yeah. Yes, really well said. And I think, obviously this podcast describes a very extreme, very, very, very extreme situation. And most people are not going to find themselves in that kind of space. However, there are still well-being spaces which can be unsafe, which can be misleading. And again, it's how do we work with what we're feeling, what we're seeing? It's like it goes back to all the domains that when we have awareness, when we start to cultivate awareness in the practice first and foremost, it means then that all the other domains of the practice can happen. But if we don't have that level of awareness, self-awareness, awareness of what's happening around us, then the old patterns can stay, can't they? And like you said, when somebody is desperate to belong, or when someone's feeling like they're not enough, and I certainly got that feeling about a lot of the women that were speaking, it was, I found that really upsetting, because these are young, professional women, and that there is this sense, I have to do this in order to be better. And when we're thinking about the spaces that we go into, it's like, listen, but really listen, and notice But it's, again, this is a practice, isn't it? Learning how to listen into yourself, to your own body, to your own responses. If you're not used to that, or if you are probably someone who has experienced some complex trauma or something else in life, then obviously your nervous system is primed in a very different way. And therefore, your response to certain things is going to be really quite different. But it's our responsibility, I think, as space holders, if I use that word, I know it's a bit, but, as space holders for the wellbeing community, then I think it's really for us to lead the way in creating communities and spaces that hold people, where people feel like, okay, I feel grounded here, I feel steady here, I feel like I'm being taken care of. And I wonder if, if she and the other women really felt taken care of. There was kind of like a superficiality of niceness and smiley and friendly. But there's a difference between that, isn't there, and feeling, you know what I mean? That sort of sense of really being nurtured.
Yeah. And I think being held is what I'm thinking about. And the other thing that I think that just simply as a student, as a teacher, as a human, we must always have a sense of choice and invitation. And, Jane and I don't sit here, thinking that we know everything about everything. We sit here with life experience of being students and teachers. And it's that thing of, you learn over the years that the more choice you can give a student, the more choice you can give yourself, the better. And when you move in a space where there is no choice, that's the red flag. So when you listen to that podcast, of which it is an extreme example of yoga being used as an exploitative tool, what you can hear is there was no choice. It was, the whole group are doing this, so you do it. This is the steps that you need to take to spiritual transformation. There is no other way. And it's like, hang on a second. We are working with people in the wellness space. The more invitation that you can give, the more choice, the more encouragement of exploration to see whether it feels right for that person, the better. And if you was to frame that, as you say, in a trauma-informed approach, that's what we've learned, isn't it?
Yeah.
As wellness specialists, or wellness practitioners, I should say, is we've learned that the more choice you give someone, the better. The more you can, like you say, nurture them and hold them in that decision-making and in that choice, because it's so often outsourced with people. It's like, well, I don't know, I don't trust myself. I don't know what the next step is you tell me, and you're the healer, which is such a classic one, isn't it? And then there's a conversation around people who frame themselves as healers, and how ethical is that truly and really, and where's that drive coming from? Is it coming from a place of, as we would say in yoga, ahimsa, non-violence to ourselves and others, or is it simply coming from a place of ego?
Yeah, exactly. And that red flag, that if you are in a space and you are being told what to do, and it's very prescriptive, and there's no option in any space, that's just one of the red flags. And we might maybe just end, when we finish this session, just to talk about what to look out for, just generally, so that your nervous system feels tended to, that you feel like that. And yeah, you're right. It's a form of disempowerment, isn't it? In that sort of relationship, which, a teacher or someone who's giving these practices to help people to feel better needs to have boundaries, and we understand all that, but also needs to have humility, the humility to be able to listen and the humility to be able to appreciate that each individual may need a different approach, and we may need to encourage a different way to do the practices that's appropriate to that person, which is why the one-size-fits-all thing, as we know, doesn't work. But in that particular instance, it was like people were being shamed for not doing the things that they were being told to do, which again is another classic it's very sort of triggering for someone who may have already experienced that. And again, it takes you back to the sort of high school mentality as well, of that sort of, we're the ones that are doing we're the good ones because we're doing as we're told, and the guru wants us to do this. But what the guru is asking is so utterly extreme. And like for me, I would want to research my teacher and know who they are and what have they done and where have they come from, and to question what that system is before I go into it. But not everybody's the same, and that power dynamic, as we know, is massive, isn't it? In these kind of, in all of the examples of abuse in yoga, it's invariably it's about the power, the one who has the knowledge, the one who has this potential to give you liberation or enlightenment or whatever you want, whatever it is people are looking for, and they often don't really know what it is. They're just looking for an answer.
Yeah, and to be honest, just anyone who calls themselves a guru, personally, I'd be suspicious of.
Yeah,
Number one, you've just called yourself a guru. I'm suspicious of you. What has made you think that you have attained that level, and why are you saying it to me, and why are you framing yourself in that way? I personally have found that the best teachers are the ones, like you say, are just doing what they're doing. They're not calling themselves anything. They're not promising the world to people, and they don't promise healing. And you and I have talked about how that doesn't really sell, does it?
No, exactly.
It doesn't sell if you're saying, well, give this a go and see if you feel a bit better.
Yeah.
Rather than, I promise you, if you do this 5-step spiritual mind treatment, you are going to be in ananda bliss, as we call it. But yeah, the first thing is honestly, if someone says that, I think I'm already a little bit like, my teachers have never referred to themselves like that, and they're the best teachers from my experience, and they've helped me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think there's something in that, isn't there? That how are people framing themselves? And with the Gregorian Vivalaru, he was very much there was lots of whispers of him being this particular person, and him being this guru, and him being spiritually enlightened. And the lady herself said that when she actually met him, she was shocked. She couldn't believe that it was this, 50 or 60-year-old man who had been behind this cloud of mystery, if you know what I mean, and the mysticism of him.
Yeah.
The reality and the expectation was two incredibly different things.
Exactly. Kind of seedy.
Mm-hmm.
And, ironically, the word guru means to remove the darkness and to reveal the light. How ironic. Because that whole thing was shrouded in darkness. It was just darkness. And yeah, you're right. The teachers, like the Mohans, Mahanji would never want to be called a guru. That he will say people like us, referring to themselves on the same path as we are, because we're all householders, and of course they are a bit further down the road. But yeah, I'm always suspicious of somebody who makes any kind of claim. And that word healing, it's so, it always makes me cringe a bit when I hear it, because I just think, who's got the power really to do that? And, we're living in a time where life is increasingly complex, and, mental health issues have always been something that we've battled with, because we only have to look at the Yoga Sutras to see that. But that now the speed and the level at which we're living and the kind of intensity of everything, along with the hypersexualization that exists, which, I think that is something which has been put on yoga. And that's a whole other conversation about the sexualization, the hypersexualization of yoga and people who practice yoga. But, all these things, it's confusing. And people are conflating things which have no place to be in the same space. It does come down to power, and it comes down to, as well, money, which is a recurring theme of every time we've had a conversation, isn't it?
And also I think that yoga as a practice operates currently outside of that mainstream. I think of organisations, companies, the NHS, which does have red tape. It has health and safety.
Yeah.
It has policies and procedures. And I've had a few debates about this over the years of, the spectrum of people feeling like that's gone too far in the extreme, and then people who feel like, the wellness space needs more regulation. And the way that I think about this is, well, if you are a true person, human, who enjoys and wants to follow the yoga path, you ultimately want what's least harming. And if you think about on that spectrum, which is least harm, it's like, well, it's to have some form of recognition that we need these policies, procedures in place. We need health and safety, because if we don't have those things, we don't have those ethical, code of ethics, then ultimately it's the risk is that you're going to cause harm, as we heard in that podcast, an extreme amount of harm.
Yeah, and as you and I both know, even in the spaces where there are all those regulations and health and safety, harm can still happen. So not as much, but it can still happen. So if that's the case in those spaces, look at this totally unregulated space and how maybe much more often harm is happening than we actually even know about. These are just the people that have spoken up. There'll be many more people who are afraid to speak up. And there will also be people working within the wellness space in organisations who know that harm is happening, but don't want to lose their job or their work or their source of income. And it's something very hard to do, isn't it? To to choose ethics over having a good living. And that's what I did. I did that, and it just, you just don't feel aligned with something, and that affects how you feel about the work you're doing. And because it is so much a set of ethics or an ethical code that underpins how we live our lives, like every part of our lives, and we don't get it, like you were saying, we don't get it all right. We don't know it all. We haven't experienced every single instance of where we might bring these ethics in, but we're always doing our best to try and carry that through into everything that we're sharing. So yeah, I agree. It's a very complex idea, and I know lots of organisations have tried to bring it in, and I think it's a very unwieldy space, isn't it? And yeah, I don't know. That's a conversation to have, isn't it? Really, with all the people in the yoga business, if you like, people who are trying to work ethically. How do we safeguard ourselves, and also how do we offer? And people have actually informally done this. Offer like documents or guidelines to people, to say, okay, and there's a whole load of stuff around cult dynamics, which basically that was a cult. And, where can people find information? Where can they find resources? And, if there is someone out there who's been attending a yoga or a meditation space and feeling maybe some of the things that we've been talking about, or maybe just thinking, I'm being told to do this and I'm not sure. Where do you go to get that guidance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's what do we need to do now in the present time? And then it's how do we revisit as we keep saying, ancient wisdom for modern lives? And that's where the yamas and the niyamas come in. So if you've never heard of the yamas, it's this idea of moral restraints from the ancient yoga texts, and niyamas being personal observations. And these explorations in these yoga texts are asking us, how do we ensure the integrity of the practice for ourselves, for the people that are in the room with us as a community of people in that space, and how do we make sure that we bring those ethics to other people?
Yeah, and they are universal ethics. They're not. It's nothing new that's in those, is it? Not do no harm, speak the truth. Make sure when you speak the truth, you do no harm. They're all interlinked, aren't they? Don't take something that is not yours. That they're all, and the way we treat ourselves as well is so important, because that plays into how then we are when we're in a space that's potentially unsafe. If we haven't taken the time to get to that place where we feel established in the self, that faster place, then it's going to be much harder for us to stand our ground or to feel the confidence to say no. So we sort of spoke informally last week, didn't we, with Matt and Eddie, about this idea of if you're in a space and somebody adjusts you inappropriately, what I did was say, no, get off. What are you doing? That takes confidence to do that. And again, it goes back to what people's experiences have been, what kind of dynamic they have around that, and if they feel that they have to comply. And again, it's massively complex. But at least if there is a sense of, well, if this is a space which is built on the tenets of yoga, go and have a look at the yamas and niyamas and see if that organisation is doing those things. Is telling the truth, is making sure that you're not coming to harm, and that and also giving the power to you. That empowerment of giving people practices that they can go away and we get the belief, go, oh, I've gone away and I've done this on my own and it really works for me.
Yes, that thing that I feel like you've hit the nail on the head for part of this conversation, because it's complicated, but that idea of you need me to reach enlightenment, it's so disempowering. Yeah. And it really, I also felt a lot of anger listening to that podcast.
Me
because
too.
We know that...
Actually, I was raging at one point.
Yeah.
I just was really... I could feel that sort of... I was like, I'm going to switch it off for a moment and just reflect. Why am I feeling so angry? And for that reason, that very...
anger is just a beautiful emotion that steps forwards and says, my boundary's been crossed.
Yeah.
So no wonder we were feeling angry, because so many boundaries were being crossed, listening to the journey of those individuals.
Yeah.
But yeah... literally a red flag is if someone is consistently telling you, you need me to feel better. I'm like, hang on one second. That's not the way that yoga works. This internal awareness practice, this ability to make sense of our lives from the way that only we know what we've been through. And in group classes and in community settings, people are arriving having lived their own life journey, their own stories, their own ability to process and deal with stress, group dynamics. It's like, there's ever anyone saying that, you need me, I'd think, no, you like,
be a worry, wouldn't it?
Yeah, guidance. And also it made me think about that idea of, it was so transactional, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas, as a teacher, we share our knowledge and we encourage people to go away and to explore things and see if that helps them. But when it's that, what is it that they want back from you? It's like, well, in the case of this particular scenario, it was sexual exploitation. Yeah. And then, like you said, there's a wider discussion to be had there, but it's that thing of, whenever anything's being encouraged to be explored in a group setting, particularly sexually, it's like, that's something that is a huge boundary that is like massively been crossed, isn't it? And,
yeah, absolutely.
And how those two things have been pulled together is extremely questionable.
Yeah, and also, if you are going to work with people on their sexual self, there are specialists and people who've had proper training to do that and work with couples, or but again, it needs to be so boundaried and so very safe. It's not, and this, I don't even do pair work in my classes. The only time that I might explore that is when I'm working with teachers. When we did the yoga therapy, we did a couple of things, but I'm just aware of how, when people come into your space, you don't know them, you don't know what their background is, you don't know why they've come to the class, and then just saying, right, you two lean on each other or do this. It's even that is crossing something that can feel really unsafe for people. And as you say, just being asked to do that stuff. And it was very, as well, it was a very heteronormative space in which the women were, I feel, it was just so massively disrespectful. But the men were also being manipulated as well. Less so, but still. And it just was, it was sickening.
Yeah,
actually.
and also in these particular circles, it's this idea of them bringing, you've spoken to us about this, of purity and cleanliness and how that is used as a manipulative tool for people, as if people were ridden with sins. It becomes tied to religion in a way, doesn't it?
And
this
shame.
idea that, and shame, a deep shame, either encouraged, might already have a seed of that in their existence, and then it's encouraged to grow rather than to be reduced. It's that thing of, what does it mean to, when someone tells you, if you do this practice, you'll be clean. And there was even references to the devil in that particular podcast, as in what they were exploring.
Yeah, there was some sort of crossover with Christianity, wasn't there, in Romania? But yeah, you're right. Utilising stuff, using it as a tool to do your bidding is a hallmark of all sort of cult dynamic or religious, extremism or whatever. But to use, and I think the mother says this, to use yoga as the sort of the way to get people in is massively reprehensible. And especially for people like us who really believe in how the practice can really help people and how it can be accessible and how we can make it work to reach people who are struggling, to use it for the opposite. Just, it's hard. And I having listened to it, the thing that I thought was, okay, what can, I thought about my teachers, and I thought about how they will always say, we just need to do this. We do this, and we offer these teachings, and we help people by doing it in the right way. And we don't, and in a way, there's a lot of people who will say, not that my teachers would say that, a lot of people say, oh, it's not my business, but it is our business. It is our business to make sure that we are guiding people. And if somebody says, I'm thinking of doing this, or I'm thinking of going here, I would always say, I would warn you not to do that, because I don't think it's safe. That's just I would feel that if I didn't do that, then it was like irresponsible of me just to let someone go ahead and try it if I know already that it's potentially harmful, or that I've actually know someone who has been harmed by it. Then yeah, it's our and then our responsibility to keep those spaces steady and safe, and as safe as it can be, because safety comes from the individual and where they are, doesn't it? And we looked at that when we did the modules on the course. But I agree with you. It's very, very hard for people going out into the wellbeing space looking for some help. And I've been to various festivals and things where I've seen many, many very vulnerable people just looking for an answer, spending money on things that are really not useful. But it's almost like, well, I might as well try this. I've tried everything else. And however, in this case, she was somebody who had a good job. She was somebody who was, didn't seem like she was desperately searching. So that speaks to the power of those kind of organisations to suck people in very, very, like we said, very subtly. So yeah, I don't know what else to say, really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, collective responsibility is a part of being any community, isn't it? And there are so many different psychological studies that have been done on this, that thing of what it means to have a group tell you that something's normal. And part of our physiology is, as we have started to slightly touch on in these episodes, this nervous system responds to, I am feeling threatened and I am in danger. One of those responses is, well, how can I people please?
Exactly.
And if you're in a group setting and, somebody we know told us that they went to a festival and the teacher had said, once you're in this tent, you are in the tent, you can't leave, you have to lie down. And how awful that was for her to experience that in her body. And I just want to make that clear that a stress response is, we know that it's that you can freeze and that you can want to people please. And so part of that is knowing that the person who is in power is the one that's manipulating literally our natural responses and reactions to stress. And then, that's, I suppose, what they would phrase as majority influence. Most people are doing it, so I'm going to do it, which you could hear in those episodes. Then there's the other side of that, which is minority influence. It takes one. And like you're saying, this collective responsibility, it takes one voice to change some people will call it the energy in the room, some people will call it the atmosphere, however you want to think about that. But, it takes one voice to say, actually, I don't think this is right.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, because of the way that you and I are wired and the way that we've lived our life and grown, it comes somewhat easier to us to say, kind of, sometimes it's just a look, isn't it? I'm not too sure that you're framing this in the right way, and I'm going to question this and I'll challenge this. And it's part of that duty of you not just doing that for yourself, you're doing that for the group, as in the people in the room to have that responsibility of safety for those around. I'm not saying that that is easy for all people, but
No.
I do also want to just really honour the fact that it sometimes just take one. It does take one voice to say, like, I remember once I was on a trauma-informed yoga course, and the teacher, one of the students, said that she knew this man who'd been ex-military and that he was going around doing trauma talks, and the course had been set out, and we had the syllabus of the course for that weekend. And the teacher decided to bring this professional in that she'd never met to a group of students on a trauma-informed course, and to have him present. And he presented his life experience, his professional experience to us as a group. And I remember just I felt really unsafe that he was sharing stuff that in my life experience it didn't ring true. And, I kind of like put my hand up and was like, kind of said to him, have you run any of this by, clinicians and therapists? Because it's not actually what my experience is of dealing with somebody who's in a highly, stressful life event. And he was kind of like, no, but I'm, this and that. And when I spoke to my brother about it, looping back to, we must always speak to trusted individuals in our lives, and that's what yoga encourages us to do. My brother does not practice yoga, but he's a trusted person to me. And I was really upset about this experience I was having on this course. We'd been sharing a lot of stuff. We'd been talking about trauma hour after hour after hour. When I ran it by my brother, he said, so you're telling me that the teacher has taken an ex-military professional and brought them into a civilian population, and then he's talking to people about trauma? He was like, that is wildly inappropriate, Sophie. And I'm telling you now, this isn't just your experience. I'm out of this, and I'm telling you that that's not right. He doesn't have any experience in the NHS. He's not a practitioner. And then in my sense of self, because I'd been to somebody who I trust and love and who trusts and loves me, felt better about that situation and was able to go back and say to the teacher, this isn't appropriate. It's not appropriate that you didn't even know what he was going to say and you've brought him in, and I'm not agreeing with what he's saying as an OT. It's not something that I've ever come across.
No, exactly.
And I suppose that's a simple example of...
But it's a really good example though, isn't it? Because the other thing about trauma is that, as we know, we can keep revisiting something again and again if we just continue to talk about it and we don't kind of work through the whole spectrum of of approaches. But also to bring somebody in, like you say, who has clearly had his own experience, but who doesn't have, again, a safe container for it. It's not, I don't know what his background was or anything, but it doesn't sound like that. And also, if you as the person holding the space doesn't know what they're going to present, that's also, because the whole thing of predictability is a really important thing in trauma, isn't it? And if someone's highly anxious or activated, if you don't know what's going to come and then something comes out of it and it's really awful, even just listening to, definitely content warning. Don't listen to that if you think that any of these subjects may rekindle, activation and trauma, because it's very, very likely that that's what you'll feel. And and as we know, trauma sensitivity and trauma sensitive yoga has become a buzzword. It's become a way of making money. There are lots of people out there offering trainings and courses which may not be as safe, if you like, or as holding as you may need them to be if you're someone who is going into that because you've had that experience and you want to help yourself, or because you've had that experience, you feel like you've worked to a certain level and then you want to help others. It doesn't matter. I just think because of the money-making potential of everything, people just grab onto stuff and, looking around for the gimmicks. I mean, it's not off topic, is it? Because in terms of what's happened here, again, it's quite likely that there's people going to run workshops about how to get out of a cult or what to do if you've had abuse in yoga or whatever. But again, who's holding that, and what is their intention? You've always got to ask yourself, why? Why do I need to do that? Can I be more useful in another way? Can I be more useful just being someone who is running, as you say, choice-led, curiosity-built practices that make it possible for everybody to access some of these practices. I'm feeling right now like I almost want to sit down with a group of people and just think about, well, what are the things we could do to guide people? When you're looking for something, what is ethical? What would be a good sign? If you know what I mean, if you go to a class and someone's saying something and you're not sure, what is it that might be something to keep an eye out for?
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, maybe we could finish this episode of thinking about what are the steps that teachers or students can take to cultivate and maintain ethical spaces and communities. How can we ensure that people feel safe to speak out if they do witness something?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you're thinking about it from a person attending an event, the first thing is question everything. I don't mean question everything just to be awkward, but question everything and anything that you're not sure about. Don't be afraid to put your hand up and ask the question. It's all right to be the little boy in the Emperor's New Clothes. To say, I don't think he's wearing any clothes. Actually, it's really all right. I've been that person many, many times, and I think it's good to challenge in a nice way. And
there's challenging externally, isn't there? Putting the hand up and speaking out, which is a great tool. And then there's also that challenge internally. Listening to our own interoception, exteroception, which is this idea of we've all got this ability to have a spidey sense, and some people's ability is impaired, which due to stressful life events and trauma, they can't connect into that feeling of, is this dangerous? This is a known pattern, as you said, in trauma, that because of what they've been through, they can't go, this is feeling dangerous. So in that respect, that needs to be worked on through the yoga practice of awareness, contemplation and absorption, which we'll talk about in more detail. But then for those people who do have that, it's that thing that we have. If you've never heard of this, if you're walking down the street and you just get that feeling like the hairs on your back stand up and you just want to look over your shoulder, or it's that thing of, I need to cross over. I'm thinking, for women, classic, we're walking on the street. We are constantly tuning into that spidey sense if it's available to us. And I think that internal challenging of a yoga space is so relevant, that small voice that says, I don't think this is right. I'm not comfortable here. Always listen to that small voice, give it a microphone, I always say, and let it speak its truth. Don't feel that you have to be so led by other people, and even the mind's agenda is one thing. Well, you might even be thinking, I'm not going to lie, I think I thought on that trauma-informed course, well, you've paid for this, Sophie. You've paid for this. You need to go back to that space and finish that course, even though, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But that thing of the mind having one agenda, but the body having that felt sense of something in your tummy, or your heart might be beating quicker. It's that thing of, can you really honour your experience? And one, leave if you need to, leave, and then discuss it with your mentor. Because I remember I definitely rang Marilyn about that course. I was really struggling with it. So spoke to my brother, spoke to Marilyn, spoke to all my trusted people.
I was going to say, speaking to, always keeping your trusted people around you and speaking to them in any situation where you feel like that is so important, because it goes back to what we were saying about them trying to keep you up. I'm not saying that it's that extreme, but, you know, one of the things is keeping you away from those trusted people is one of the ways for you to stop second guessing yourself and to end up just believing the hype. Because there's no one, if you're not able to question it, then, you know, it's like you need other people to say, no, I don't think that sounds right. I think maybe that's, oh God, I wouldn't go to that. I wouldn't do that. What are you on about? You know, because like you said, like your brother, who isn't a yoga person, hasn't got that background, is able to go, that sounds terrible. That's really important, isn't it? To have that reality check with somebody that you really trust. And I think the other thing is, if you feel that you're shamed in any way by the teacher or by the other people in the group, if, you know, there's any kind of dynamic that feels at all icky,
punishing,
that's making you either go back to some old patterns or just making you feel some way that you've never felt before, just leave it. And it's all right to walk out. It's actually really all right to walk out of a class.
Always.
Just
always.
Go. Just go.
Always, absolutely. And yeah, when I think about those harmful spaces, it really is the idea of something is punishing and something's competitive. Even in that extreme example of this podcast, they had this Miss Shakti competition of the women.
Yeah.
And anything that's, if you're in the space where in a physical asana, they're encouraging competition from what you look like, the shape of the pose, how quick you're doing things. Often in those harmful spaces, like the teacher themselves will do a shape and be like, well, I will now show you. That's just encouraging competition. You're very saying much. You're doing one thing and the student's going to feel like a failure. Anything that's punishing, anything that's competitive is not an ethical yoga space, in my opinion and my experience.
No, and I think there's many people who maybe don't realise that is something that's going on under the surface. Even something like a teacher going, just try this. And we've said this before, haven't we? This just, and then they're demonstrating something which is impossible. It's like a sort of subtle shaming almost. And sometimes, you know, practice and all is coming. I don't think that what is meant by that is, oh, well, if you keep practicing, you will be able to put your legs in this position. No, you probably won't, because maybe that's not how you're made and built.
And that thing of, is it functional? Like that classic thing of, and what I mean by that in the terms of this conversation is genuinely ask yourself, whatever it is in the space that the teacher is offering you, is it relevant? Is it meaningful to you and your life? And is it functional in terms of what you want to achieve? Is it going to move you towards feeling healthier and more content, more peaceful? And, you know, things like physical shapes, often some of those yoga shapes are not functional. They serve no purpose for longevity, as in for people to live a longer life. They serve no purpose for people experiencing less suffering. No. And there's a lot of strange myths like wrapped up in some of that, like, oh, well, if you can do this shape, you're going to release all of the emotion and trauma in your hips, for example. And we know that tight hip flexors lead to tight pelvic floor muscles, which lead to tight vagus nerve and vagal tone is less. So it's just a manipulation of like basic anatomy and physiology for the gain of something that loses its groundedness.
Exactly.
That's the other thing I think about these. How do we know that we're moving in a space of safety? Is the person that you're with, do you have a felt sense that they're kind of grounded and centered themselves? Or do they seem off with the, like away with the fairies almost? Like, and it's
like there's a delusion that may be
of
there.
grandeur, a delusion of grandeur. Yeah, absolutely. It's
doubt is the teacher. That's what I want to finish with. That's something that Mahanji says, and I think it's so true. When there's a little bit of doubt there, often that's the thing that is going to lead you to the truth. What is actually, I'm going to listen to that doubt, and then I'm going to act on it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a conversation that we'll probably continue in other ways, because I think ethics in yoga is huge, but there's lots of little areas of it that we can probably talk about.
Absolutely, yeah. I was just thinking, my friend Holly always says, if in doubt, do nout. And it's that thing of, if you do, like you were saying, if you're doubtful of it, don't do the thing that the person's asking you to do. Do now, don't do it. And as Marilyn would say, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it.
Exactly. The opposite to Nike. Oh, thanks for suggesting this as a discussion. I think it's been really interesting, and watch this space.
So on our next episode, we're going to be talking about the role and the importance of community. As we've touched on today, being a yoga student means you're rolling in circles of people, and what does it mean for us to have community in our lives in a positive, supportive, empowering way? So that will be our episode 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Inside Out, a yoga therapy podcast, is hosted by Jane Cragg and Sophie Coggins. To leave comments, ask questions and interact with the show, follow Yoga Therapy Podcast on Instagram. Please also subscribe, rate and leave comments wherever you listen to help the show reach more people. This podcast is recorded at QPod Studios in Oldham and produced by me, Matt Dean, with video production from Eddie Corteen for QPod Productions. For more information, visit kupod.co.uk.